Cultural Backlash, Trump, Brexit, and Authoritarian Populism by Ronald Inglehart and Pippa Norris is an insightful exploration of the dynamics behind the rise of populist authoritarian movements across the globe. Published in 2019, the book analyzes political and cultural shifts over the past several decades, emphasizing the tension between progressive values and traditionalist ones. This tension is identified as the foundation for a phenomenon called cultural backlash. Below is an overview of the book's main arguments, themes, and implications, interwoven with a critical analysis of its broader significance. Understanding cultural backlash. Inglehart and Norris argue that the growing support for populist leaders like Donald Trump, the Brexit referendum, and similar movements in Europe and beyond are not purely rooted in economic factors, as many theorists suggest. Instead, they propose that these movements are primarily driven by cultural grievances. These grievances stem from the perception among older, less educated, and socially conservative populations that their traditional values and cultural norms are under threat from progressive and cosmopolitan ideologies. The authors suggest that this cultural backlash is a reaction to long-term changes in societal values, a process Inglehart has explored extensively in his earlier works, such as The Silent Revolution. These changes include the rise of secularism, gender equality, LGBTQ+ rights, multiculturalism, and environmentalism. While these progressive trends have been embraced by younger generations and urban educated elites, they are seen as alienating and threatening to those who feel left behind by globalization and modernity. The role of value change. Inglehart's theory of value change, rooted in modernization theory, is central to the cultural backlash argument. Modernization leads to economic development, which in turn fosters post-materialist values such as self-expression, individualism, and tolerance for diversity. These values contrast sharply with materialist values that prioritize economic and physical security. The shift from materialist to post-materialist values, however, has not been uniform. Many societies, especially those with stark inequalities or rapid cultural shifts, experience a generational divide. Older generations, who grew up in more traditional and homogeneous environments, often feel alienated by the rapid pace of social liberalization and demographic change. This alienation fuels their support for leaders who promise to restore traditional values, national identity, and social order. Economic versus cultural explanations. While economic inequality and globalization undoubtedly play a role in the rise of populism, Inglehart and Norris argue that cultural factors are more decisive. Economic anxiety, such as job losses due to deindustrialization, is often intertwined with cultural concern, particularly when traditional communities perceive that their economic struggles are exacerbated by immigration or global competition. For instance, the backlash against immigrants is often framed in cultural terms, such as fears about cultural integration, loss of national identity, or threats to social cohesion. Populist leaders exploit these anxieties by crafting narratives that blame societal problems on the elite, immigrants, or minority groups. Their rhetoric resonates with voters who feel that their values and way of life are under siege. This cultural framing makes populist movements distinct from purely class-based political movements. Generational divides. A key element of cultural backlash is the generational divide. Inglehart and Norris emphasize that younger generations, having grown up in more diverse and liberal societies, are more likely to embrace progressive values. Conversely, older generations are more likely to support populist and authoritarian movements as a reaction against these changes. This generational divide is compounded by demographic shifts such as increased immigration and urbanization, which create a sense of displacement among those who identify with traditional norms. The authors also note that education plays a significant role in shaping values. Higher education tends to expose individuals to diverse perspectives and fosters critical thinking, which correlates with support for progressive policies. This creates a divide between urban, educated populations and rural, less educated communities, further fueling the cultural backlash. Populism and authoritarianism. Populist leaders often present themselves as the voice of the people against corrupt elites. They promise to restore national greatness and protect traditional values, often through authoritarian means. Engelhardt and Norris point out that this authoritarian populism is particularly appealing to those who value order, stability, and conformity. These individuals are more likely to prioritize security over freedom and are thus receptive to the authoritarian rhetoric of populist leaders. The authors identified two types of populist movements. One, right-wing populism, focused on nationalism, anti-immigration policies, and cultural traditionalism. Examples include Donald Trump, Marine Le Pen, and Brexit supporters. Two, left-wing populism, concentrated on economic inequality and anti-globalization, with leaders like Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn. While both forms challenge the political establishment, cultural backlash is more strongly associated with right-wing populism, as it directly addresses the perceived threats to traditional values. Implications for democracy. The rise of cultural backlash has profound implications for liberal democracy. Engelhardt and Norris warn that populist authoritarian movements undermine democratic norms by eroding trust in institutions, promoting polarization, and restricting civil liberties. Populist leaders often attack the media, judiciary, and other checks on their power, framing them as obstacles to the will of the people. Furthermore, cultural backlash exacerbates polarization, creating an us versus them dynamic that hinders compromise and cooperation. This polarization is not only ideological but also geographic, with urban and rural areas becoming increasingly distinct in their political preferences. Critiques of cultural backlash. While cultural backlash provides a compelling framework for understanding the rise of populism, it is not without its critics. Some argue that the authors downplay the role of economic factors, particularly the impact of neoliberal policies that have increased inequality and economic insecurity. Others suggest that the focus on cultural grievances risks overlooking the agency of marginalized groups, whose demands for justice and equality are often framed as threats by populist rhetoric. Moreover, the generational divide is not absolute. Younger individuals in rural or conservative communities may also resist progressive values, and older individuals in urban areas may embrace them. This suggests that cultural backlash is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon that cannot be fully explained by generational differences alone. Conclusion. Cultural Backlash by Ronald Engelhardt and Pippa Norris offers a nuanced analysis of the cultural and political dynamics behind the rise of populist authoritarianism. By highlighting the role of cultural grievances and value shifts, the book provides a valuable perspective on the challenges facing liberal democracies in the 21st century. However, it is essential to recognize that cultural backlash is not an inevitable reaction, but rather a reflection of deeper societal tensions. Addressing these tensions requires a comprehensive approach that combines economic reforms with efforts to bridge cultural divides and promote inclusive dialogue. Only by understanding and addressing the root causes of cultural backlash can societies move toward a more equitable and harmonious future.